Sup, Dad?
Welcome to This Dad Reads, a bookish podcast spanning genres and fandoms. I'm your host, Jason, and today I'm joined by author Charles Soule to discuss his new novel, The Endless Vessel. What is going on, my fandom friends? I hope everyone is doing well out there. I have been on kind of a mini podcasting break. It wasn't really planned, and it wasn't really desperately needed or anything. It just kind of happened. Circumstances happened. The summer kicked off. My son had a birthday. I had a birthday. I turned 40 recently. So there's just kind of a lot going on. Summertime's a different vibe as a parent, if you know what I'm talking about, my parents out there. So, the kids are home, but life still continues. Work still continues. So it's just a different vibe around here. So still happy to jump on and record another episode for everyone. And I'm especially excited because today I have another author joining me. A lot of you will know him from his Star Wars work. And today we're specifically talking about one of his non-Star Wars books, The Endless Vessel. So Charles Soule is joining me on the show today, which is really exciting. And I'm excited to jump into his conversation and have you guys check that out in just a little bit. But first, I actually want to kick off with something a little bit different. I don't really do announcements very often, but something is coming up on my schedule really soon that I'm very excited about, and I wanted to make sure to talk about it here. So for the first time ever, this year, I am going to be attending San Diego Comic-Con. Insert applause sound here. I'm so excited. I don't really do sound effects, but I'm so excited to be attending Comic-Con this year. It has honestly been a dream of mine since I was in junior high when I first started getting into comic books, when I was, reading Wizard magazine every single month and basically seeing when the birth of this con happened and just dreaming that someday I could attend it. And obviously it's turned into something huge and just it's different than what it was back in that day, but I am still so excited to really be able to go to do what I wanted to do when I was a junior higher, just go talk to artists, talk to creatives, and now especially in this whole book world that I've been a part of for the last few years, just talking with authors, getting some stuff signed. So I will be there on Friday, July 21st, only for one day. I'm hoping to kind of just hang around the exhibit floor. I don't know if I'm going to make it to any panels. I'm honestly not prioritizing panels because I'm there for not that long. So really just trying to make sure I can get my hands on some of the exclusives that are out, especially that beautiful Rise of the Red Blade edition that I just need once I saw it. And there are some comic book exclusives I'm hoping to get my hands on. Peach Momoko has a special set, and she's going to be in attendance. So I'm really hoping I can talk to her and get her to sign some of my stuff. J. Scott Campbell's going to be there, who has just been one of my all-time favorites, and I've talked about him on the show before. I've gotten some of his stuff signed and seen him at another con before, but I've never been able to really interact with him, and I hope I can do that this time. Hoping to meet up with some book friends. I know Justin's going to be there. Josh is going to be there. If any of you are going to be at San Diego Comic-Con this year, please let me know. I would love to say hey and touch base with as many people as possible. I know it's kind of a long shot. It's one of the hardest cons to get into, but I know there's people out there who make it their mission to get there every year. And I think once you've been, it's easier to get back in, but I know it's all kind of just a crapshoot every time. So I'm hoping this is the first of many San Diego Comic-Cons I can attend, and thankfully, I live in the state where it is taking place. It is still a little bit of a drive for me, but all things considered, it's not that hard for me to pull off. So I'm so excited. Please keep an eye on my socials. I will be trying to story and kind of share as much of my experience there as possible. And I might even be recording a special on the road edition of this podcast, which, if all things work out, I will have another author interview on the books. And I think I can line an episode up to align with a very big release that I have been much anticipating and talking about a lot on the show. So if you have been paying attention and know a lot of my non-Star Wars obsessions, you might have an inkling about who I might be able to talk to and what book I'm talking about, which is coming out later in this month. So that is my big announcement for the day. I'm so stoked to attend San Diego Comic-Con. It's going to be an experience. It's going to be a ride. I hope to see as many of you there as possible and to share my experience with all of you guys while I'm there and after the fact as well. So like I do every episode, I'm going to jump into my last current next. The last book I read was Star Wars Dawn of the Jedi Into the Void by Tim Levin. This book was part of the most recent wave of the Essential Legends collection, released back in May. I finally finished them all up, and my Dawn of the Jedi review is now up on TatooineTimes.com. So this book, it's not canon anymore, sadly, but this book takes place 25,000 years before the events of the Skywalker saga that we are all very familiar with. And it's a real departure from most things that are quote-unquote Star Wars. So there's no lightsabers, the Jedi are in their infancy, they're even spelled differently, and that's a nod to George Lucas's original spelling of the Jedi back in some of his early drafts of the movie. So it was a little reminiscent for me of some of the stuff that we've been experiencing in the High Republic, just purely for the fact that it kind of takes place outside of anything that's really known. Even the High Republic, I mean, there's lightsabers there. There's a lot more stuff that's been established that is more familiar, whereas Into the Void, it's kind of just this, it feels like the Wild West, like anything's possible, and the world is very different feeling. There's no hyperspace travel, so I might be preaching to the choir. I might have been one of the last people to read this book, but it was the first time I'd ever done it, and I overall enjoyed it. There were some moments that I felt a little disconnected from the story, and I felt like the pacing had, it's kind of on and off moments. And there was, structurally, this novel bothered me because even within the book, there's a time jump where the main character is reflecting back on, some of her earlier days. And I just wish the book did a better job of differentiating the present versus the past parts, because I found myself kind of getting thrown and not realizing which time period we were in. So small gripes for sure, but I really liked it because it was a character-driven story, and I went into it kind of assuming, because it's called Dawn of the Jedi and it's kind of this very in the past story, that we were going to get some, revelations about how the Jedi were formed and like how they learned, how they trained Padawans and all that stuff, but this is not that book at all. And honestly, I think it's kind of better for it. It is just kind of a standalone mission adventure story about someone trying to find their way in the galaxy. And those are some of the best Star Wars books, in my opinion, that exist anywhere in canon or legends. So I would recommend checking it out, adding it to your list if it sounds interesting to you. So like I said, my full review of this book is up on TatooineTimes.com. The book that I am currently reading, and I actually have been reading this for longer than I would like to admit, but it's kind of been one that I've been reading alongside a couple of my other books. It's called Burn It Down: Power, Complicity, and a Call for Change in Hollywood by Maureen Ryan. Now, this is a nonfiction book, and it is very rare that I read nonfiction books. I'm really a fiction lover. That's my first passion, and that's what I do for fun, and I'm writing reviews and I'm talking to people about those types of books, but every so often there's a nonfiction book that piques my interest, and this is one of them. And this piqued my interest because I had seen an article before this book came out, and it was all over the place if you were anywhere on the internet or pop culture, a couple months ago or a month or so ago, where this author kind of did an expose about the just horrible situation and circumstances for a lot of the workers on the Lost show that aired on ABC some time ago, and I was like, wow, that was intense. And once I read that there was a whole book that this author and journalist had compiled and just documented about kind of just the toxicity and craziness and workplace culture of Hollywood that has been part of it for decades, since its inception, really. So my interest was already piqued because I had read that article, and then History Nerds United on Instagram actually interviewed Maureen on their podcast, and I listened to it, and after hearing their conversation, I immediately just went and bought the book. Like, I bought it digitally. I couldn't wait anymore. I needed to start it. So I've been reading it for probably 3 weeks now, and I am on the home stretch. It's almost done. She jumps there's a whole chapter on Lost, there's a whole chapter on Saturday Night Live, and then there's just kind of some general talk about some just general culture things, people she's talked to. Evan Rachel Wood, she interviewed her. Some of her people she's talked to are anonymous because they want to protect themselves. And then I'm into the second half of the book now, where she kind of talks into what a better way of management can be in Hollywood and what that can look like. So it's called Burn It Down. It's really good. If you are someone who's interested at all in pop culture and kind of the inner workings behind the curtain stuff, it's fascinating, and I highly recommend it. The book that I'm planning to read next is a reread of Lost Stars by Claudia Gray. So after I talked to Claudia Gray and put that episode out and was kind of talking about it on social with friends, a lot of people were saying that, like me, Lost Stars is one of their favorite books. And it was the first one that got them into Star Wars books. And I know I was seeing some chatter of people saying, well, I need to do a reread. It's been too long, and I've never done a reread of Lost Stars. So the next book I'm planning to read is Lost Stars. And if you want to join me, I'm hosting a reread on Instagram. Check out my social today. When the day this episode airs, we are starting the reread today and giving ourselves a whole week to do it, because I got something else I got to read next week, guys. So this is one of those books, though, that you honestly can't put down. And if you've never read this book before, I would highly recommend you jumping in and doing it with us. I'm going to be creating a private group chat on Instagram, and we can just kind of keep up and chat about it and geek out about all things Lost Stars and why we love it and why it's an amazing book. So that's coming up next. Hey, KC78, are you excited about our guest today? I am too. Can you make sure everything's set up for our conversation? You're the best, Casey. Thanks. So joining me today is an author who's one of the original creators of The High Republic. In fact, his novel Light of the Jedi kicked off the entire initiative back in 2021. He's very well known for his work in the Star Wars landscape, of course, but he also writes his own original books, and his latest book, The Endless Vessel, was released on June 6th. Fandom friends, please help me welcome to the show Charles Soule. Welcome, Charles.
Thank you very much for having me on. I appreciate it. It's nice to be here.
Well, congratulations on your year so far. I feel like there's been so many things coming from you that fans of Star Wars and of your original work have been getting. Obviously, the High Republic Phase 2, a miniseries, The Blade, your latest novel, The Endless Vessel, and there's more to come on the docket with the recently announced Shadows of Starlight, and then you have your illustrated book, Jedi Brave in Every Way. Like, are you tired, or does this ever really get old to you?
It never gets old. I love telling stories. I love that I'm able to tell stories with such a big platform and people are interested in reading them. Some of this is just stuff slowed down a little bit during the pandemic, and it's kind of stacked up. It's like cars on a train, and so a lot of it seems like it's coming out now. But it was kind of like that before. I'm just a prolific guy, and I do a lot of stuff, and I do it in different buckets. So writing an original novel scratches an itch that writing a Star Wars comic doesn't, and so I like to be kind of working in all those spaces at the same time. So it is definitely exhausting sometimes, but the response and the chance to get to tell stories in these spaces is absolutely worth it.
So do you find that you get energized by staying busy, or do you need to schedule in downtime for yourself to make sure that you can kind of keep everything in balance?
I do thrive on it. I definitely have built up a lot of different systems and techniques that allow me to stay super busy and not pass out, I guess. But I also, I've carved out some time for myself to take a break this summer and really not do a ton of stuff. I mean, it's funny because when I say I'm going to take a break, I'm only going to be writing 3 ongoing comic series in those 2 months, July and August, while I'm recording an album that I promised to write a couple years ago. So my version of slowing down is maybe not everybody's version, but it's definitely going to be a little bit of a break. I'm going to enjoy it, and I hope everybody else gets to have the same opportunity this summer.
What is that album thing about? Are you a musician too?
Yeah. So in the summer of 2020, I did a Kickstarter for a book called Curse Words, which is a comic series that I did with my 8 Billion Genies co-creator Ryan Brown. And So we did the Kickstarter for an omnibus collection of that comic. It was an Image comic originally. And that Kickstarter did incredibly well. And when Kickstarters do well, you start offering up stretch goals so that people will continue to pledge and continue to be excited. And the stretch goal that I idiotically offered was to write and record a concept album set in the world of the comic. And I've been doing music since I was really, really like 3, like really, really, really little. So it's not like I was promising something I can't do, but that's just sort of capability wise. In terms of time wise, I really clearly did not have time to do it. And I was so excited about it when the stretch goal passed, but then we're 3 years out. It's 3 years like right now. And I still have not delivered this damn album. And so I've written it. The album's written, but I have to get in the studio and record it. And so I have demos of the songs, and there's 10 songs, and it's really good. It's really fun. It's really cool and strange, and I really like it. But people have been waiting on it for a long time. And so I feel like it's time to really buckle down and deliver on that. So,
Okay.
yeah, so that's one of the things I'm going to be doing this summer, which will be, for me, it's a little bit of a vacation because I'm not staring at a laptop all day typing. I'll be playing my instruments and singing and arranging and all that. It'll be cool.
You're kind of like a man of all trades. That's awesome.
Yeah, the only thing I'm not a great drummer, so I have some drummers coming in who are going to handle the drum parts. But other than that, I mean, I can't play horns very well, but I can play pretty much everything else. So I'm going to be playing most of the instruments, which is also just sort of efficient because I can just kind of do it as opposed to having to go in the studio and get a bunch of people there to do the other parts.
That's awesome. I feel like there's, in a lot of these circles, I was just talking to one of my buddies the other day, I feel like all the people who are kind of in or who love reading, that there's that artistic bent. So I have a history in music as well. That's actually how that's where some of my passion started from. But I feel like some of those artistic leanings kind of just all blend together. So that's really cool. And I don't know if you've heard of Tom Fletcher. He's a UK author, and he's in the UK band McFly. He writes younger adult books, but he writes music to a lot of the books too. And I think that's a really cool, creative way to kind of like flex your story and tell it in a different way. That's really cool.
Yeah, it's been really fun. And I used to be in, tons. This is a bit of a tangent from what people may be expecting on this interview, but I used to be in a million bands. It was how I fed myself in college and so on, was playing in all these different bands. And then I went to law school and I was still in bands and I still played a lot in New York City. And then the minute I started being a lawyer, I couldn't really be in bands anymore because you can't work at a law firm and go to band rehearsal and play gigs. It just doesn't really work.
Sure.
So this at this point, that's like, I don't know, 15, 16, 17 years ago when I stopped having music as a really constant, significant part of my life. And I still play a lot. I'm still have the skills. I just don't get to play out. And so I really, really miss it. And doing this record is an excuse to just get back in the studio and kind of get a bunch of new material together. And I don't know if I'll start playing shows again, but I certainly wouldn't mind. I think that'd be fun.
That'd be so fun. I don't know if that's how exclusive to Kickstarter that is, but I would at least love to hear that at a certain point. So I don't know if you're planning on releasing that any other way.
Well, believe me, it is going to cost a couple of bucks to do this. So I am going to, and all of the funds from the Kickstarter are long since gone. So I am going to be, it's going to be available on my website and
Cool.
so on and so forth.
Cool.
So
Well, looking forward to that.
All the Kickstarter backers will get it. Everybody else can get it too if they want to. So believe me, I will make sure that folks know how to find it when it's ready.
Amazing. So before I do, definitely, we're here to talk about The Endless Vessel, of course, but I've talked to a number of your fellow High Republic authors recently, and I want to just get your take on how your experience this year at Star Wars Celebration went. Can you break that down for me a little bit?
Yeah, Star Wars Celebration this year was in London in April, right over Easter weekend. So the second weekend, I think, something like that. And it was just like the previous year at Star Wars Celebration, which was kind of the coming out party for the High Republic, because all of the books in Phase, well, not all, but many of the books in Phase 1 had come out during the quarantine. So we didn't get to have events. We didn't get to have a celebration. We didn't get to have the in-person fan interaction to really understand what we had done. And the celebration the previous year in Anaheim, we were completely astonished by the fact that people were responding the way they were. There was cosplay. People were lots of people were recognizing us on site and asking for selfies. And we felt very cool and special and felt like we had done something really interesting. But the test of it was London, because when we did it in Anaheim, it was new. It was like the new thing. And of course, there were people going to be excited because it wasn't something people had necessarily seen before. But then in London, it had grown significantly. And London, while it was obviously drew in people from Europe and other parts of outside the United States, I think a lot of the I mean, I'm not sure, but my theory is that if we had done that show again in Anaheim or Chicago or Orlando or something like that, it would have been even crazier, because like more wild and more people and more fans, because they're just, I think a United States-based show can just draw more people in theory. I don't know. I'm probably wrong about that. Star Wars fans are everywhere. But regardless of where it was, it felt incredibly powerful to see how much we were touching people, not just on a story level, but on clearly a representational level. People felt very seen by the High Republic stories. They felt like this was a corner of Star Wars that was just for them. And again, we were constantly accosted in the nicest possible way. This is not something I'm saying was bad. It was wonderful by people who just wanted to chat with us for a minute and tell us how our stories had touched them in some different way, touched their lives, touched their minds, touched their hearts. The signing lines were always really long. And right now I feel like I'm starting to just brag, but it felt like what we did during the quarantine was one thing. What we realized we had done in Anaheim at the first Star Wars celebration that we got to have in person together was another. And then seeing it in London, especially with the debut of The Acolyte, and knowing how connected The Acolyte's going to be to the High Republic stories that we're telling with Vernestra Rowe and many other things, like it just, we did it, I guess is what I would say. It felt like we really had done something. And knowing that in many ways, the coolest parts are yet to come with I guess phase 2 is complete now, but with phase 3 on the way, we know what's happening. We know what's coming, and people are, if they like what they've seen so far, it's going to really go over well. So long answer to a quick question, but it was fantastic. And I can't wait for the next one in Tokyo in spring of 25.
Oh man, multiple people online are fundraising to try to get there as well. I would love to be there.
I'm sure that is the one thing about it. I understand why they chose to do it, because they haven't been over to that part of the world and want to make sure fans from over there have a chance to celebrate too. I get it. But it is far away. I have Trials of the Jedi is landing right around then. So I will be there for sure. Yes. Which is really exciting for me. So I like just knowing that I have that. I probably was going to go anyway. I don't know that I'm ever going to miss a Star Wars celebration again for the foreseeable future. But knowing that I almost certainly will be at that one is cool, because I haven't been to Tokyo since I was really little, and I just can't wait to go back as an adult.
100%. That place is goals for me, for sure. Mm-hmm. I will just say really quickly, Charles, I was at Anaheim that first year. It was really cool. And I feel like this corner of the Star Wars fandom is so just pure and nice, and like having that experience. That was my first celebration, and feeling, especially with book people first of all, but then Star Wars book people are just the best. And like I made a friend in every line I was in the epic signing line for High Republic. Mm-hmm. Was able to chat with, and like when we find you guys, like you're like our quote unquote celebrities, right? Like, and so I feel like we feel like we have this in to like, we know what who the authors are, and we just want to talk. And you guys have always been so generous and so kind. And I feel like seeing what happened in London and seeing the response to even like Jedi Survivor and people wanting to continually jump in to the High Republic. And I just feel like we're just this fandom just with open arms who we are encouraging people to jump in and like love these stories with us. So it's been a really cool thing.
It has. I mean, when you take a step back and look at it in the abstract, like what we, particularly the first 5, but really all 10 of the authors now have been asked to do, we were told that the job was to take this thing that we love, all 5 of us, and I'm specifically talking about the initial group, but that is not to say there's any the full group. Everybody's incredible, and we all know that because we've all read their stories by now. But that first group, when we went to Skywalker Ranch and we were said, they said, you love this thing, and now you get to make a thing that is entirely yours, basically, entirely your version of it. What a gig, right? I mean, it was and remains incredible. I still can't believe it happened. When I think about it, stepping back from it, I can't believe that I was one of those 5, and I can't believe that I got to write the first story either. Like that part of it is, and that it worked like it has, and we haven't let you guys down, and just it's really something.
Yeah. Well, congrats. I'm all in. A lot of us are all in. That's basically the reason why like I do this and why the show's here. So it's an exciting thing. So love to jump back into Endless Vessel. I will say that this was the first non-Star Wars book of yours that I have ever read, and I really thoroughly enjoyed it. I've had your other works on my TBR like list forever, but this was one that I just jumped in and checked out, especially because it was a newer release and I wanted to kind of just check it out, and I really liked it. And I said in my written review that this book really defies genre and categorization. So in your own words, can you describe the Endless Vessel for my listeners?
Sure. I mean, there's thematic stuff, but that's not as hooky for people. So I'll say what the story is about, at least the parts that I can get into without spoiling things, because there are elements of this book that I really feel like are best discovered in the pages. But it is essentially about a group of people who many, many years ago, like 250 years ago, who were there, like a sort of a group of geniuses, found the secret to happiness, like the real deal. Like this is how they found it, like a treasure almost. And they decided to keep it for themselves. And they have been sailing around on a ship for 250 years, nonstop. That's the Endless Vessel of the title, keeping the secret to happiness all to themselves. And that is set against the present day of the story, where mankind has kind of looked around and decided, hey, we're kind of done. Like we've had enough. We're not really going to be able to proceed. People start getting afflicted with this thing called the Gray, which is kind of an illness in the story, but you can think of it almost like a malaise or a plague of just not giving a crap anymore. People are just not. They're just over it. And that manifests itself in a number of different ways. But really what it means is the world is really starting to wind down. And the main character is a young woman named Lily Barnes, who is a British expat living in Hong Kong, who finds basically a hint or a clue that this society on the ship exists. And she goes on kind of a treasure hunt for them because she's hopeful that maybe that will change her life, maybe it'll change other people's lives, and so on. And there's a lot more to it, but that's basically what it's like. Think of it like the Goonies, except they're looking for happiness as opposed to gold and jewels. Although some people will be very happy if they found a bunch of gold and jewels. And it's kind of has a magical realism element to it. So stories like Gabriel Garcia Marquez, authors like that, David Mitchell. There's definitely genre elements to this story that are cool. There's science fiction in it, but it does kind of defy categorization, which is how I like to write. If you read, I think listeners of this program will probably have read Light of the Jedi, which is in that one book you get a disaster movie, you get a Western, and then you get a space epic space opera situation all in one book. And that is not atypical for how I like to write. And it's not that different from the way Endless Vessel proceeds either. In that book, you have 3 sections, and each section is kind of its own genre of story, which is, if you can do it and if you can make it all work and make it a satisfying experience for the reader, I love to do that kind of thing.
Definitely. And you kind of said that Endless Vessel is split up into these 3 sections. And I was kind of getting hints of It's a little bit similar to the High Republic. There's 3 sections. And without giving too much away, there's a little bit of a time jump in the Endless Vessel as well. And how do you best use these time jumps to help just tell the best story possible?
My second novel, original novel, Anyone, which came out before Light of the Jedi, has significant time jump stuff in it too. So it's clearly something I use. Mm-hmm. I like the idea of exploring characters fully. And sometimes doing that at different stages of their life is a really interesting way to do it. And if to bring it back to Star Wars again, if you think about the way that we just saw in Kenobi, Leia and Luke, but more Leia as a little girl, and then if you want to watch Last Jedi or Rise of Skywalker, you're going to see that character at the end of their life. Mm-hmm. And there are many, many, many moments in between when we get to see what Leia was up to, whether it's reading books like Bloodline or whether it's reading the comics like the ones I'm reading right now, or you name it. They're just all over the place. We've seen a lot of these characters from their birth through their death, and that is a really interesting way to think about characters, because it's not just about the moments, it's about all of their lives and all of the choices they made over this amount of time. And within the Endless Vessel, within the High Republic, it's just neat to me to be able to show how the choices that were made a long time ago can influence situations now. Plus, it's just kind of fun. I don't get bored easily necessarily, but it is nice to mix things up and try different things and flip around and bounce around. And for this book, Endless Vessel, I really wanted to set myself the challenge of writing two things that are very difficult. One is writing historical. Mm-hmm. So there's a big chunk of the novel that is set basically when that ship I mentioned starts sailing. So it takes off from Boston Harbor right around 1789, which is the end, just after the Revolutionary War here in the States. And getting things right about that time was tricky. Like what did people eat with? What did utensils look like then? What did people wear? What did people sit on? What did windows look like? Did they have glass in them? Like all of those basic questions that you really want to get right if you're writing a story. So doing all that research was challenging, but really fun. And then the other thing I really wanted to do in the historical section was write about a sailing ship, because I have loved books like, Patrick O'Brien's whole Master and Commander series, the Aubrey Maturin books, the Horatio Hornblower, any books that have, even Moby Dick, right? Any books that have a big age of sail nautical element to me have been interesting, and I think that is, fully in line with my dad credentials. But I like those things, and it's a whole layer of technical data and technical knowledge that you need to have to be able to write those kind of things well, or at least even plausibly. And I thought, I've read all those books, so maybe I can do my own version of it. And while the Endless Vessels ship is kind of more like a Jules Verne kind of Captain Nemo, Nautilus sort of sci-fi version of a sailing ship, there's still a lot of interesting sailing stuff that I was able to get in there that I was really happy about.
I will say something I just thought of as I was listening to you describe that is I was getting a lot of Lost vibes. Were you a Lost fan?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, absolutely.
So that was
a deeply influential show.
100%. And I was just I was reading that new Burn It Down book. I don't know if you've heard of it, where they basically talk about all the craziness going on that show. So I would say this is if you're a fan of the show Lost, like this book, you would love this book.
Yeah, well, I read the big excerpt about Lost, so I'm familiar with that, and I know some writers on it, and I know it was challenging, and that's I don't really think there's actually, having worked in very intense creative environments, it doesn't have to be, just because it's intense and everybody is being asked to deliver at their highest level doesn't mean it needs to be miserable.
Sure,
is I guess my comment, and I think. Looking at that article, we're really going on a tangent here, but I think that the people involved know that. I think that that was 20 years ago, and I think people have thankfully, not everybody, but many people have come to the realization that you don't have to behave like an asshole to create good work. Like you can be intense, you can demand high performance from people without being cruel to them, without making them small to make yourself feel big. And I know that creative work, especially high-level creative work where there's a lot of money at stake and a lot of success and a lot of power, can put people in places where they feel like they have to act that way, but it's ridiculous. I don't think that's a good way to do it.
Yeah, it makes for a really fun read, though. I will say that book is crazy interesting.
Good story, right? Yep.
Right. And just like Lost, and you said it before, like when you were just describing the book, and I get that probably your pitch for people who don't know anything about the book is to like lead with the adventure and the historical fun stuff. But just like Lost, same thing. It's like this sci-fi thing with like a mystery element. What really is at the heart of it is this kind of emotional story, this really human story, and that's Lily's journey in this book. And that was the part to me that when the book was all over, these themes of like forgiveness and like identity and like figuring out your place in the world and your purpose really are at the core and the heart of it. So where did your inspiration for these elements come from, or where's the source of that pouring out from for you?
Well, as we mentioned at the beginning of the call, the show, I have a daughter, and she is 17. She's going off into the world soon, and I'm aware that, as we've also talked about, I work all the time. I'm always doing stuff. I'm always busy. I'm always writing. I'm leaving tomorrow to go to the West Coast for a signing tour for Endless Vessel, so I'll be away, and the sense that there's this clock that's ticking down after she goes to college is very much on my mind, and I have to think about, well, what am I going to be leaving her with? What is her impression of me? What is her impression of the world? I would like to think I won't stop teaching her lessons when she's off into the world. And, like, I will still be a significant figure in her life, but I know from my own experience, it's just different. When you go away, when you go to college, when you go to build your own life, you should step away. But anyway, those kind of father-daughter, father-child thoughts are very much in the mix here. And the other element that's pretty central to it is just connections in our life and what they mean, and other people and what they mean to us, and how we should maintain the connections that we have in our life, how we should seek out the connections in our life, and what an actual connection with somebody else means. And I'm dancing around a big spoiler element in this book, which I know you know about, but I have a very firm sense, particularly post-pandemic, of what the secret to happiness is, like how we can be happy, and not in a self-help book kind of way, but I'm certain of it. I'm sure that that's the way it's done. And that is what the book is about. It is presenting that thesis to readers, like, this is how you do it. And it felt like, in much the way that Light of the Jedi was a book about hope in the darkness, about hope in the when it seems like all hope is lost and everything's falling apart, there's still a reason to be hopeful. We're all the Republic, for life and light, so on and so forth. All those slogans that aren't just slogans to us. The Endless Vessel is about connection, and it is also coming out of a time when we were all deeply disconnected from each other, except possibly from our immediate families. I think it's a good thing to be putting into the world at this time, after what we all went through together.
I 100% agree. And I would say, obviously we all went through it in the pandemic, and I feel like this book really speaks to a lot of kind of those feelings and emotions that a lot of us were probably going through at that time, in terms of like, is the world ending? Like, it feels like there is a lot of reason to just give up and to give up hope. And it's really easy to fall into despair. And it's a really beautiful message. It really hit me. And I will say, you don't have to be a father or a parent to get that message across. And so it's a really beautiful thing.
Well, I'm glad you liked it. But I will also say it is also totally, like, it's kick-ass. Like,
yes.
It's super fast-paced.
Yes.
It's thrilling. There's like mysteries in it. There's action, really cool. Like, things blow up.
Yep.
I did a signing event at a shop in upstate New York last weekend. I don't know. I've completely lost track of time. I think it was last weekend. And the moderator said that the book felt like the best kind of Spielberg summer blockbuster. And I think
that's a good way to put it.
That was a comparison that I had not heard before, but I kind of will stand behind it. Like, that, it has the emotionality of a really good Spielberg, but it also does not stint on the spectacle at all. Like, it's super. It is a total ride.
Yep.
You will have a great time. But you'll come away from it feeling pretty good, I think, and thoughtful, I think.
And those are my favorite types of stories, when you're like, oh, there's something deeper here. Like, I had a great time. It was a ride. I didn't want to put it down. That's, to be the real litmus test of a book. If I don't want to stop reading it, like, if you just keep going later into the night than you're planning on it, that's a really good sign. But then at the end of it, when you're like shedding a little tear and like looking at your family a little bit different of a way, that, that's a good sign right there. And there's also a music element. One of the main characters is a musician. So I just put that together with like your experience. So that was probably another piece of it. So that's awesome.
I have not yet written my full-on musician book. The first book I wrote, my first original novel, was called The Oracle Year. The main character is a bass player in New York, but he's like somebody who was good in his hometown. Okay. Like the best player in his best bassist in his hometown, but he moves to New York and he's just like another guy. And the scene in New York is merciless, because you literally have like the bass player who you might just go see with some random band is also the bass player for, like, I don't know, Bruce Springsteen's band, or whatever the huge touring band might be, because that's where they all live in New York. Sure. So if just because you were great at home doesn't mean you're going to be great in New York. And the guy comes to the city and kind of reckons with that, and it sets up a lot of other decisions he makes. But there's music in that book, and there is music in The Endless Vessel, and obviously there's music in Light of the Jedi too, with Avar Kriss and the Song of the Force.
That's right.
But all of that said, I have yet to really write my full-on music book. Okay. And I have it in me. I know that there will be a time when I just write a book that is all about music and the musical experience. But but first I'm going to get this album recorded.
There you go.
I need to do that first.
Yes, priorities. Make actual music first.
Yeah, and then I'll write a book about me.
Yeah, and then a Star Wars music book. The first Star Wars. No, I'm just kidding.
Well, it wouldn't be. Wasn't the holiday special has a couple songs on it, doesn't it?
Oh gosh. Please, can we get a better written Star Wars musical thing from you, Charles? I mean, that's entertaining for its own reasons, right? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So you mentioned Kickstarter before. You've ran Kickstarters in the past. You ran one with the Endless Vessel again, which was successful. So congrats again on that.
Thank you.
Obviously, this has been an enjoyable experience for you, kind of doing the crowdfunding thing. Like, is this something that you want to continue doing in the future? And maybe you want to talk a little bit about how this experience with this one went.
Crowdfunding is a curious thing. I really like it. So this is the second one that I've been directly involved with. I've pledged a bunch of them, and I've helped my friends with theirs, whether it's just doing little bonus things or just signing stuff for them, whatever they might want me to do. But I've officially run two, and the experience is very intense because you're kind of hanging out there in the wind a little bit. If it doesn't go well, everybody can see that it hasn't gone well, and that doesn't necessarily reflect on you or your choice of project or your popularity or whatever the thing might be. Fortunately, mine have both funded very quickly, so I didn't have to worry about that. The latest one I did, it got like over 200% funded and more. It's like it did very well, which was very exciting. But the thing about a Kickstarter is that it is incredibly detail intensive and labor intensive, and there's so much you have to do to make sure that the people who have put their faith in you are happy and feel like it was a good experience for them, because you are asking people to directly connect with you and your project and making a promise to them that you're going to fulfill it the way that they expect it fulfilled. And the numbers on Kickstarters, even like mega successful Kickstarters, it's not like 1 million people. It's usually hundreds or thousands of people who pledge for these things. So the customer base is very small, and there's a real sense of intimacy almost in it when somebody backs your Kickstarter, and they feel like they're not, maybe they like the creative thing you're doing, but they really are kind of doing it because of you. Mm-hmm. And so it feels very one-to-one and very direct in a way that, say, a Star Wars novel or even Endless Vessel, like the traditional published version of Endless Vessel feels different than the special edition of the book we offer through the Kickstarter, because these are people who went the extra mile to find it and to pledge it and to get extra stuff. So it's a lot of work. It's a huge amount of work to do one. I'm in the throes of fulfilling the one that I did, which I'll describe in a second, the one that I just did. So right now, I'm not doing another one of these for a long time. They're too much work. They're too distracting. They are very, very labor intensive. But give me 6 months or a year, and I bet I'll be kicking around some other, no pun intended, thinking about some other way to do it. I already have a few ideas of things that would be fun. But ultimately, it's just another way to get your creative work to the world. For me, the thing that I kickstarted in this last one was a companion novel to The Endless Vessel, which is the book we've been talking about quite a bit. And so I thought it might be really interesting for people to get a second book that was set in the same universe of the main book, because I always found that really interesting when authors I loved growing up would just say, hey, here's this other project or this other short story, or you can get like a pin or a t-shirt or whatever the thing might be that is set in the world of the novel. And I always kind of assumed I would need to be at a certain level, which I mean, arguably I am at that level, which is a nice thing. But the idea is that I didn't have to ask anyone's permission to make that second project. I didn't have to get a publisher invested in doing it. I didn't have to raise, I didn't have to raise a ton of money to make it happen. I just said that I was going to do it. And then I was able to engineer it and construct it exactly the way that I wanted to do it and put it out into the world. And people showed up. They pledged and they wanted it. And it was incredibly gratifying. So what I have now is this entire second book that I might have written. I always kind of had the idea to do it. But doing the Kickstarter incentivized me to write the other book. And so now I don't just have one book set in this world. I have two. And if there's one thing I know about my creative career at this point, it's that I never regret telling a story. I never regret writing a project, big or small, because there's always a place for it. It always finds its audience. And it's always like, I never, it's like exercising or going for a run or something like that. I never regret doing it. Sometimes it can be a little tricky to motivate in the first place, but once it's done, I never regret it. And so the Kickstarter is a lot of work. It has been totally challenging in all the best ways, but now we're basically in the home stretch. A lot of people have gotten their copies of the main book, the special edition of the main book, The Endless Vessel,
which is gorgeous.
The second book, Chronicles of the Lazarene, is being put together, designed and printed now, and will go out as planned sort of towards the end of the summer. So, and that's when that's what we said we do, and we're sticking to it. And it feels good to have a complex project like this coming together the way that we said it would. So, and people seem to love Endless Vessel too. The reviews I've been seeing have been awesome, which was really, really great.
Yeah, I will say that if you are a fan of Charles's work in Star Wars or any of his other original novels, you will not be disappointed in this book. The special edition cover is gorgeous. Like, the art on that is so good.
It is. And if anybody's listening and wants to participate, we overprinted and we kind of set it up so that people could participate if they missed the campaign. If you go to my website, just charlessoule.com, there's a banner at the top of the main page that is for the Endless Vessel. And on that page, there's a link that you can click to order all this stuff if you want to get it. So
that's awesome.
If
that's
anybody
really
listening wants to do that, I would suggest that.
100%. I'll definitely link your website in my show notes so anyone can check that out as well.
Thank you.
A couple more quick questions before we go, but I would just want to ask you, Charles, what author or authors, if they were to run a Kickstarter, I guess I was going to say living or dead, like whose Kickstarter would you back like in a heartbeat?
Sight unseen, God. Some of my favorite authors. Right now, I've been a gigantic fan of Neil Stephenson for ages. Like and David Mitchell, those two authors, I will walk through fire for in terms of getting anything that they write. But there's a lot. I'm also a huge fan of people like Neil Gaiman, Stephen King, lots of fantasy writers that I really enjoy. There are many. I've been really enjoying what Mary Robinette Kowal, who writes the Lady Astronaut series. I think her work is incredible. What else have I been reading lately that I really enjoyed? R.F. Kuang. I think her work is spectacular. Punk Shepherd, who actually blurbed the Endless Vessel. She's a friend, but I think her stuff is really cool too. I don't know. There's a lot of writers who I really am impressed by and respect. And it feels like a really vibrant time for authorship, particularly science fiction authorship, because I feel like 5 to 10 years ago, the doors kind of were blown apart to allow a lot of different perspectives in that we weren't necessarily seeing as much. And so, and yes, I'm talking about the way that science fiction was almost exclusively written by white dudes for a long time. And now it really does feel like you get books written by all kinds of different people and when you're talking about a genre, I'm going on a little bit of a tangent here, but when you're talking about a genre that lives and dies by the inventiveness and the novelty and the ability to explore ideas that you haven't seen before, you need perspective that you haven't seen. And it's I think it's been a real shot in the arm for the genre world, whether it's speculative fiction or, Ted Chiang's awesome. I just saw there was an amazing trailer for The Three Body Problem, which is that amazing series by Liu Cixin, right? So, and we could do 3 hours on this, but the idea that like Three Body Problem in particular, some of the best science fiction I've ever read, and part of the reason it is so good is because it was written by somebody who is a person from China, and their perspective on a lot of these like genre tropes that are only genre tropes because we've always seen them executed exactly the same way for 100 years. It felt so fresh and different and cool. So I don't know. I think it's a really good time for genre stuff.
Yeah, and I agree. And for reading, like I feel like reading has just gotten more of a resurgence lately, whether it's pandemic or what. I've talked about this with other people on the show and friends. It's just like I feel like so many more people are just hungry for stories in this way particularly. And so I feel like just there's like a rabid, fervor for just new stories and different stories out there from the fan community. So it's a really cool time. I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit again. This is my last question. I ask this of everybody, but every episode I talk about what the last book I read was, what I'm currently reading, and what I'm planning on reading next. So I would like to ask you, Charles, what is your last current next?
Okay. The last book I completed was Babel by R.F. Kuang, which was a really, just mentioned her a second ago, Rebecca. It's awesome. It's a sort of alternate history fantasy story set in Oxford, England, the university of the early 1800s, where England has figured out a way to make a magic based in silver. And it's partially based in silver, like pieces of silver bars, and translation, specifically the difference in translation between two languages. So the word fire in English versus the word hua in Chinese, and the way that what those words and the other implications of those words are different in English versus how they might be in Chinese. And so the magic is based in the difference between those two. It can create an effect, which
that's cool.
It was so ingenious and so cool. I'm a big fan of languages and differences in translation and all that stuff. It all is fascinating to me. So I thought it was a really, really cool read, especially because on top of that, she layers in this whole anti-colonialism message that is really timely and cool. So I was deeply impressed with that book I really dug that one. So that was literally the last thing I finished.
Does that have anything to do with like the biblical Babel? Like, is that what it's based off of? Because different languages when the languages got all mixed up.
They have Babel is what the school is called in Oxford. There's like a particular college within Oxford that is the Translation Institute, where they train up all these scholars to be able to teach, because in order to translate properly, you have to be able to be perfectly fluent in two languages. And so they work with people to create that level of fluency. And ultimately it's just another way of sort of conquering, which is really, it's just great stuff. It was really, meticulously constructed, and I was very impressed with it. Currently reading, I'm always reading at least three things at once because of the way that I read, because I read audiobooks while I'm running.
Okay.
I read Nook books, usually like just before I'm going to bed. I have like an e-reader, and it has like a glow screen on it. So I just read usually for, any 5 minutes to an hour before I go to sleep. And then I have I read a lot of books in hardcover too. So the next book I am going to, or what I'm reading now in all those spaces, let's see. So on the e-reader, I'm reading a book named Secret Identity by my friend Alex Segura, who is great. He actually just moderated a discussion of mine in Brooklyn, the Brooklyn debut for Endless Vessel, and I was a little behind in my reading and hadn't gotten to this book, even though I knew it was great. So I wanted to get into it before he came and moderated the talk. So I dove in and I got through like the first 100 pages, and I was like, "Damn, this book is amazing!" So I am super excited to keep reading that book on the old e-reader. On audio, I am listening to a book called Master of the Revels, which is written by Nicole Gallant, and it is a sequel to another book called The Rise and Fall of Dodo, which was a book written by Nicole and Neil Stevenson, and it was about a really interesting approach to the idea of time travel. So I am about halfway through that book. It's really kind of naughty and intricate the way that they approach time travel. It's, time travel is one of those tropey things. Either it's like, we just travel through time and that's how we do it. And other people really take a deeply precise and almost physics-based approach to how it would be. And this is kind of a mix between that. People time travel in these books via witchcraft, but it's cool, like sort of scientific witchcraft, which is really neat. Anyway, and this one's mostly set in Shakespeare time London, which is a time that I like and find interesting. So really enjoying that. And then the hardcover book that I just got something I'm about to get into. Because I'm going on a trip and I'm going to take it with me. I'm about to read a book called The Sympathizer, which is a Pulitzer Prize winner I'm excited to read. And then I think it's called The Puzzle Master, it literally just dropped like last week. but it sounded like a really good beach read. Yeah, The Puzzle Master by Daniel Trussoni. So that one is it's like reality and the supernatural collide when an expert puzzle maker is thrust into an ancient mystery, one with explosive consequences for the fate of humanity, which sounds like a perfect beach read. Like I'm all over that. That's going to be a blast. So that is what I'm reading. In terms of what I'm looking forward to that's coming up, well, I'm looking forward. I've gotten to read a bunch of the High Republic novels in Phase 3, which has been cool. So I'm excited to see those as they come to final form. I am looking forward to a book that sounds super weird called Whale Fall, which is about, hold on, I'll tell you what that is. It's about it's basically a very realistic, by Daniel Krauss, Whale Fall by Daniel Krauss. It is a book about it takes a realistic approach to somebody who gets swallowed by a whale and has to find their way out. And so it's kind of the Jonah story, I guess, or Pinocchio, but it takes an actual real scientific look at what that would be. And I would imagine you would just die. I don't know that there's any getting out of a whale.
Just get digested? Yeah.
Yeah, it's a stomach, right? Exactly. So I am so curious about the concept that I am really looking forward to that. That's out in August. So I don't know. I read a lot of books. I'm a very voracious reader. I'm guessing you are too.
Yes.
And it feels like a great time for stories.
100%. And I am going to be pausing back through when I listen to this episode and adding all of these books to my to be read list, definitely, because they all sound right up my alley. So that's awesome. Well, maybe I'll have to send you some other DMs once I need some more recommendations or something like that.
Sure, absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Charles. It was an absolute pleasure. The Endless Vessel is out now. Thank you so much for joining me. I want to give a huge thanks to Charles Soule for joining me today. I had an awesome time talking to him about The Endless Vessel. I highly recommend this book. Please go check it out. Again, if you're going to be at San Diego Comic-Con this year, I would love to touch base with you. And if you want to read Lost Stars with me, please join my reread. So until next time, happy reading, and take us out, Casey. Thank you so much for listening. For more of my content, visit my website at thisdadreads.com for full book reviews, interviews, and articles. Follow me on socials at thisdadreads on Twitter and Instagram. This Dad Reads, the podcast, is produced by Aravis Industries and me. Special thanks to my editor, Jeremy Tuttle, and to Coma-Media for the use of their song Bounce. If you like what you've heard, please subscribe on your podcast platform of choice and leave me a 5-star review. It really helps. Catch you next time.